Okay, we're ready. Button.
And you're live.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is the fifth meeting of the short-term rental working group, and I'm Brent Stockwell. I'm one of the assistant city managers for the city. And this is the June 16th meeting. And just as a reminder, the purpose of the working group is to examine existing laws and tools available to the city regarding short-term rentals, and then to work together to identify opportunities for the city to improve monitoring and enforcement of regulations to ensure that Scottsdale is doing everything it can to manage the impacts from short-term rentals. The group is working on its recommendations right now in these last two meetings. And the findings will be shared with the mayor and city council at their July 1st meeting coming up in a couple of weeks. We are going to start with our first item. And Shane, do we have any requests to speak?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. The written comment that we had received is available through that link. I think there may be a couple of comments that were received and weren't able to be uploaded yet, but we'll make sure that everything is received is uploaded to the public comment for the next meeting. The main item for today is the discussion on the recommendations, and I'll just kind of highlight the resources that we did provide to the working group and have available in the linked from the agenda. The main one is the working group draft recommendations document. In a moment, Shane will pull that up and we'll use that to kind of navigate through in our meeting today. We also did another staff update document as we committed to. So there was an update from the city manager's office, an update on code enforcement, and then an update on the work of the business regulation units work to identify additional short-term rentals. And unless anybody has any specific questions about that, I won't take the time to go through that. And then working group member Carl Eisenberg had sent some information with his thoughts on it, so that's linked. And then working group member David Mason had provided some additions to the document that we had developed at the last meeting, and then also some observations about taxes, which were responded to by staff. So what I want to do at this point in time is, Shane, I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll have you start sharing. And then let me talk a little bit about this document. And so what we did is we went through all of the information that was provided and feedback from the last meeting. We tried to group things together, and then we also tried to respond where appropriate with some additional context. And the way we set this up is that we thought it might be helpful for you, the working group members, to kind of have kind of a column along the right-hand side where you could kind of identify whether or not you were supportive of one of the recommendations or not supportive of it, or if you had questions or needed additional information. In continuing to try and do this, there was some duplicated information where it was in more than one place. So we tried to put it under whatever was the kind of most or the best suited recommendation for that area. And but we might have missed something. So I really want to go through those recommendation by recommendation, see if we're getting closer, see if anything is still missed, and you really work toward your final recommendations, which will be at your next meeting. As I mentioned earlier, we are planning on having a very quick turnaround on these recommendations. So the final recommendations that you decide on at the June 30th meeting, we will have those the following day on the July 1st meeting. And the reason we're doing such a quick turnaround on that is we would really like to get, not only because of the importance of this subject, but also because we'd like to keep working on it from a staff perspective over the summer, so that any ordinance that might be required could be adopted shortly after the city council returns at their August meeting or even their September meeting. So what I'm going to do is I am going to work through these kind of in sequential order, and we will use the hand raises and calling on everyone as we've been doing for these meetings. And so I'm going to start with the first one. So the first recommendation we have, there's 9 recommendations and a series of other supporting points. The first one is about evaluating what additional resources need to be assigned to this effort to ensure that there are sufficient resources to identify potential problems before they occur, provide a rapid response, and follow up to ensure resolution. And this would include focused efforts during the anticipated high activity times of the year. Not intending to read through all of these, but still waiting for someone to raise your hand. And Ian, thank you. You have rescued me from reading further. So go ahead, Ian.
You're welcome. I think this is a great idea. I have a question. 6 officers, 1 sergeant, and 1 code inspector. How would that, maybe we don't know yet, but what are the thoughts on distribution of those numbers through 4 districts?
I'm going to have Assistant Chief Slavin respond to that. Go ahead, Chief.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jeffrey, members of the working group. So this group would be assigned citywide. So basically their focus would be on noise, nuisance parties, those types of activities that are occurring throughout the city. And hopefully the goal is to reduce our response time. I definitely heard that as a standout piece of feedback from the group and the community about the prioritization of these types of calls, and therefore the amount of time it takes us to respond. And many times the activity has stopped by then. And so this group dedicated to these types of calls for service, regardless of if they're short-term rental, long-term rental, or owner-occupied properties, should reduce our response time and better interact and serve the community as they're asking for our assistance in these issues and situations.
One follow-up question: would these be individual officers, or would they pair up, or how would that work?
Well, depending on the number of calls for service that evening, the sergeant would make those tactical considerations based on the information we're receiving in the independent calls for service. So if it's something that the supervisor assesses as only needing 1 or 2 police officers, and that's how he would deploy resources. If it's something much larger or has a potential violence potential or something like that, he would make different considerations for those types of calls.
Okay, and then one last point. I've heard from individuals or people that are fearful that people are listening to police scanners or have people out there who kind of quieten the party down when the officers are around there. I think I had suggested a while ago that perhaps the information being sent to the police officer might go direct to the officer's computer in the car and not be broadcast over the scanner bandwidths. Is that something that concerns you, or something that can be fixed?
Mr. Jeffrey, I don't believe that's something I'm concerned with. Most of what's broadcast that potentially could be received by a scanner would be through radio code, and a certain amount of detail wouldn't necessarily give away the response. But something like that, I'm not that concerned with. The officers do get a great deal of information across their computer. And I suspect that if the sergeant felt that that was really something impacting our ability to assess that situation, he can, in the moment, make those requests of our communication center. But yeah, I'm not that concerned about that. We have to deal with that in all of our operations now currently anyway.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. And Chief, I remember one of the other issues that related to that is that for these properties, we are required to make sure and notify the owner and give them a chance to address the situation. You want to talk about that as well, or is that playing into it too?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. Yeah. So in the event that the call is involving a short-term rental, we would follow that protocol as well. Ask for the property owner to respond to the property, and then the code enforcement piece of this would then be engaged also. Don't forget to going back to the previous question, Mr. Jeffrey, that even if that were to happen and the party were to instantly shut down in an effort to avoid detection, and we're going to be interviewing all the neighbors and things like that too. So we don't base it strictly on our observation. We take witness testimony as well.
All right, thank you. Next up is Rebecca Grossman.
Oh, yes, thank you. The response team, would those members, those officers be a consistent group whereby they are, forging kind of relationships or knowledge of neighborhoods that are problematic, or, I was just curious, or would it be rotating?
Chief,
Yeah.
do you want to respond to that as well? Thank you, Rebecca.
Yes, sir. And thank you for that question. No, this would be a group assigned to these types of calls within the city. So they're going to be a consistent group of employees. They will build that institutional knowledge and wisdom about, problem neighborhoods, problem properties, that will give us the benefit of that consistency and building that foundation.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott Bowers.
Yes, thank you. Could we flesh out a little bit more about what we mean about coverage? With 6 officers, 1 sergeant, 1 code inspector, we're going to cover 185 square miles or some such number, which is, are they going to be located in 1 or 2 officers in each district, or in a central location where they deploy from, or without giving away too much of the planning? But I'm just trying to understand how that size of a team will be able to cover issues in, that happen on Dynamite Road and issues that happen on McKellips. I'm just trying to understand that a little bit more. If you could please go into a little bit more detail on that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chief. Go ahead.
Thank you for that question as well. So we deploy certain teams like this currently that have a different focus, street crimes teams and things like that do work citywide. So I think maybe a slight misconception is that we have, multiple calls for service like this all coming in at the same time. And that's generally not how this works. They will have the opportunity to work a call or a couple of calls at the same time, regardless of where they are in the city. They can respond anywhere across all 4 districts and get there in a very reasonable time, and hopefully a much faster response than the standard prioritization that patrol that gets lumped in with the rest of the patrol calls. So I feel that this will greatly decrease our response time, or get us there more quickly. And the span of the city is something that we deal with now with other focused work groups like this one would be.
Thank you. Bobby Rush, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. So just a couple other things on this. So these would be 6 officers, sergeant, and code enforcer, but these would be dedicated positions from what it sounds like. I mean, would they be, I guess a couple questions. One is, how do we get to the number 6? And then in terms of shifts, I mean, there's to be like staggered shifts, or I know that there's an emphasis on high activity times of the year. Would this still be a year-round deal, or would it taper off in terms of the amount of manpower when things get slow?
So the number of officers assigned and the work group size itself is consistent with other working groups that we would put together for a project squad or a neighborhood problem squad, something like that. It's a pretty standard deployment for us. Regarding the nice thing about creating a unit like this is it does give us the flexibility to alter start and end times, days of the week, based on the activity that we're seeing and the trends that we're seeing. So I think, as you were alluding to, if we're in special event season and we can expect to see a lot more activity during certain nights of the week, we can work the squad during those hours and times to be most responsive at times that we think are going to be high frequency. If we believe that size of group is not big enough for a particular time of year, we'll augment with additional officers. If they're in a slower time of the year, then this group can be helpful in other neighborhood projects that we always have no shortage of, and helping us with those types of things. So the real benefit of the dedicated group is the flexibility so that we can deploy them at the most appropriate times to be most effective. There's no perfect solution here. There are going to be times where they're not working when a Tuesday afternoon party kicked off that we didn't anticipate, and we'll have to deal with that with patrol. But by and large, the majority of time, we should be able to deploy this group in the most opportune times.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Just, yeah, it's like most things, right? You'll just kind of learn as we go in terms of what makes the most sense. But I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. And these are great questions and great feedback as well. That's what we intended to do today. So any other questions, comments, observations about 1A? My understanding too is that's still very much a work in progress as we continue to discuss the staff, but trying to figure out a response team that might be responsive to this problem and also responsive to the issues that the working group has raised throughout your meetings. The next one is about improving information sharing between police, code enforcement, and business regulation units, and improving the process and workflow to ensure fair and consistent application. There's a comment there, I think also primarily from Chief Slavin. Any comments, questions about this? Bobby, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't want to dominate this, but I mean, these are all really good ideas. So in terms of just information sharing, what information would be shared or would be ideal? And is that something that we would discuss, or is that something that the city council would discuss, or is that something that the police officers would come up with, or what information would be gathering?
Yeah, let me have the assistant chief respond to that first.
Yes, thank you for that question. The information sharing we're talking about, if you remember when Mr. Centella briefed about the progression of fines related to nuisance parties and things like that, some of that information was being warehoused in the code enforcement records management system, and some was being kept by my 4 district staffs. And so this ability to have access dually to both records management systems, and with the onset of a new records management system that we're bringing into play now, a more efficient record analysis can take place so that we can be dealing, not losing any traction with a particular bad actor out there, and knowing as soon as we jump in there, hey, this is this guy's 3rd violation in a month or something like that. So that's what the information we're talking about, the information sharing that we're talking about, just making us more efficient in taking the next step on the ladder with a particular problem property.
Thanks, Chief. And I'll add to that too. I mean, the police may be going on a call for service, and there may be something identified there that code enforcement really needs to follow up on, or we may, as code enforcement is identifying it, they may realize that there's not a TPT license for that property, and they need to get that to business regulation. So I think one of the things that working on this as a staff team through the discussions of the working group has pointed out is that we really do need to do some process improvement in here and improve how we're sharing. And of course, as Chief mentioned, one of the first things that we did in response to that was to make sure that the crime prevention officers had access to the code enforcement's tracking system so that they could actually see the prior history on that. So it maybe seemed fairly straightforward and certainly something that we're already working on, but we wanted to identify that as well. Ian, Jeffrey, go ahead.
Brent, I just had a quick question. Do you plan to cover the staff report later on?
I wasn't planning on, but if you want to reference something in there, I certainly can pull it up.
Okay, I had a quick question. One of the notes at the bottom says that, where is it? Some taxpayers were found to be licensed with ADOR, and I'm assuming they weren't licensed with the city and or the county. How does that happen?
Thanks. I'm going to turn to Whitney Pitt to respond to that. Whitney, do you want to talk about that? And is it helpful for me to pull up that?
Yeah, I'd love to see what he's referring to. And I'm assuming, are you saying that they're maybe are reporting to ADOR, but we don't have the information? Because that's possible if they haven't shared it, that's not on their short-term rental, don't have an emergency contact with us. Is that what you mean?
I'm assuming that's what that infers. It's the 3 asterisks at the bottom. There you go. And I thought the process was registered with the city and the county, and then ADOR would like follow suit. But it looks like this is round the back way, the opposite way.
Okay, you're referring to short-term rentals referred by taxpayers received by our office via different sources. Is that what you're referring to?
No, I'm talking about the second one, not the third one.
From the nuisance party unlawful gathering report, some taxers were found to be licensed with ADOR.
Yes.
Okay, so violations received complaints. From what I'm gathering and what we've had is that would be someone that is filing with ADOR, but we haven't been looped in on it yet. So when we've reached out to them, they've came back to us and said, yes, we do have that. Here's the information. And we're getting it after. So that's why we're really pushing to have, I don't want to say register, but they share their contact information with us so they can have it on file. And that's how we can confirm when they do get the emergency contact, we confirm they do have a TPT, that they followed all the correct steps before we say that they are certified and good to go with us.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I also think it's appropriate, Ian, that you brought it up at that point, because that's precisely the type of information sharing that we've started. So this business regulations unit has actually received those violations that have come from the police department. And then they're also looking to make sure that they provided their complaint and emergency contact information, and also checking to make sure that they have their TPT license. So it's kind of cross-checking all of that. And so that's a perfect example of that. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Yeah,
well, I have an example where it was reported this short-term rental, I think they got a case number against them in April the 26th, and it looks like it's still open. There's no contact information or anything like that on the city website. So that was one of the reasons I was asking the question.
Got it. And that was reported through police, code enforcement?
Through code enforcement.
Okay. So what will, this is a good opportunity to look at this and follow up with it. Eric is representing code enforcement. Eric, right. Do you want to just follow up with Ian after the meeting, and we'll follow up with that particular property in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. We can certainly do that. If you have a case number and address, I can look into that and get an update of where we are in the process.
I do. I tried sending an email to Jorge, but it came back twice. His email, so I'm not sure why that happened.
All right. Yeah. So Kelly, we'll get Ian and Eric connected, and we'll follow up on that after the meeting.
Thank you very much.
All right. Any other questions about this report while I have it up? Scott Bowers, your hand is raised. I don't know if it's about this or about something else.
It's a little bit back to the comment on a TPX license. So I guess it's part of both. Is it possible to require that the short-term rentals have their transaction property tax privilege tax posted so that when some of the code enforcement or an officer goes over there, it'd be right on the door, and they know it's a B&B. That's how they got it. The people staying there probably don't know anything about that, but they can see right away, and that's a requirement of the owner of the property to post that where it's publicly visible that they are in fact licensed with the county and city.
Oh, thank you. I do know that there was a recommendation later about posting signage. I don't know, Luis in particular, do you know anything about the ability to require the posting of a TPT license on? Is that something that's prohibited or something that could be explored? Or
So posting of TPT license on where?
I think he was talking about on the property itself, similar
Yes.
to how you would go into a business
Yes.
and see a business license.
Excuse me, or it could be in the front window or whatever, someplace where it can be easily identifiable by anyone who had business there from the city to know that in fact was operating as a business, and in fact was licensed with the county and the city, so that we would know that right away. If they weren't, that would obviously create a huge database for us to be able to go after it.
So we have a sign ordinance regarding residential properties. And generally, residential properties are not permitted to have permanent signage. And if you start creating a sign ordinance that allows certain signs and not others, that can create some problems. The question too is whether also it falls in with one of the powers that we're allowed to do. So B1 under 9-539 specifically gives us certain powers that we can do to short-term vacation rentals. It doesn't give us any power to require posting of tax licenses. The gray area is potentially maybe it does allow us to have emergency contact information. So I don't think we could do that. It could be a recommended approach that the place, a short-term rental best practices, that they post a copy of their tax privilege license inside the business, or inside the residence, because other types of businesses aren't required to put their tax license outside. It's a printout and it's inside the business itself. So that would be a very unusual requirement to make it outside the short-term vacation rental. No other business is required to put their tax license outside.
Thank you very much for that. I was sort of thinking along the lines of that you need to post if you get a building permit, you put it in the window from the city. It's there to view. The code enforcement comes over and sees you're permitted.
Right, and
that's all. I'm not talking about putting a big sign out in the front yard.
Yeah, so. those are temporary permits, so they're not permanent signs, because there are exceptions in the side code for temporary signs like real estate signs and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and we'll also revisit that issue, I think, a bit later. Carl Eisenberg, go ahead, Carl.
Yes, Luis. I'm confused, and if you can help clarify this for me, I'd really appreciate it. I recognize that the state has mandated that we cannot treat STRs different than any other residential property. But we also are mandated to protect the public. And so in protecting the public, I've seen situations, let's say the Arizona Department of Real Estate, et cetera, et cetera. If you're doing business, you have to post that, what and who you are in a visible manner to the public if you're doing business out of your home, for example. And so I understand where you the path of least resistance and say, oh no, we're not allowed to do that because it's residential. But That's the problem. We wouldn't be even having this working group if we didn't have the dichotomy of the issue of the fact that it's respecting the state. We can't change what it is, okay? But the fact remains that we've got businesses in residential neighborhoods, and to protect the public, it's not to punish the STR. It's simply a manner with which you can protect the public by allowing information to be available to the general public. Not, oh, I'm educated enough to know how to go online, to go to this website, to research this database, to be able to get this detail. It's a readily accessible format. So how do you address that concept from your legal perspective, which your answer was, gosh, that seems highly unusual. But from my perspective, it seems reasonable. So can you help me understand that?
Sure, I can address that. So there are certain types of businesses that are allowed to operate from homes, right? And they may be required to have a license, a tax privilege license or what have you. And the requirement, and you can have different is that a business license or a tax license is posted inside the business. So you can't have different categories of businesses to require the tax license to be posted so it's visible from outside. In terms of the public safety issue, 9-539B1 allows certain specific regulations such as transportation to be directed to SDRs if there's a specific public safety purpose. In terms of posting the license outside, that would certainly help with tax compliance, but we have to demonstrate what the public safety purpose is. And I'm not sure what the public safety purpose would be other than demonstrating to increasing tax revenues. We are allowed to require them to provide emergency contact or complaint information. And we have enforcement mechanisms for that. In terms of public safety issues like nuisances, the statute's pretty clear that those type of things have to apply to all types of occupancies. And in terms of a tax license, there's something called the Model City Tax Code, and the ADOR, the Arizona Department of Revenue, administers our taxes for us. So there's specific statutes in place that have to apply to all other businesses that mandate where a license can be placed. And it's a very, and to modify the Model City Tax Code requires going to commission, state approval and all that. So
I understand. I get it now. I guess I was dealing more with what's coming up later in reference to information to the neighbors. So I get it. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to clarify back to Scott Bowers. I know when you brought the issue up originally, just trying to understand the posting of the TPT license in the window. How are you expecting that information to be used? Because maybe we can get at it another way. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. What I'm just trying to do is, we don't know whether or not, in fact, it is a short-term rental. Neighbors usually can, by observation, figure out that there's something, not a normal long-term rental or ownership or anything, but not always. People come and go all the time. So what I'm saying is, when this police detachment that goes there, in the event that there's an issue, or if a neighbor wants to go over and say, hey, I'd like to introduce myself, and they can come up to the window and see that here's a small, 3x5 piece of paper in the window that just says this is a, privileged tax license for Sonoran properties, short-term rentals, whatever it might be, then it is a short-term rental, and that they have in fact registered with the city for tax purposes and with the county. And that it is in fact a short-term rental, with not trying to put the scarlet letter on them, but then exactly that, okay, I'm here, I'm being a good actor, I'm compliant with the tax, we have a problem, then we know who to go to go to next. That's all I'm trying to say, is as unobtrusive as possible, be it inside the house, on the front door, in the back of the door. You know immediately. A lot of the customers are going to know they're at a B&B. We don't know that. The next door neighbors don't know that. We see weird stuff going on in houses all the time. Some may be vacant for the week, and then weekends they're always occupied. Some may be the same people coming back every other weekend that have jobs here that work on certain days of the week, traveling nurses, for instance, I think I've heard from. So my point was just, much like a hotel or any other one, business, if you're a privileged licensed tax, you should be able to produce that. Can't depend on the actual people that are staying there. I think that's too much, a bar too high to ask of them, but it's not too high to ask of the owner of the property to provide that information readily available, that they are in compliance with tax. They are in compliance. They're basically saying, I'm a good neighbor, which is what we're shooting for here, short of being able to change the system at the state level. So that's what my recommendation would be.
Got it. I appreciate that. And that I did look it up. It is down in recommendation 5, letter G. So we will get to that later. So it's definitely down there, and we can talk about that more at that time. Thank you.
I didn't see that. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, perfect. I just want to keep moving through here, and we'll continue to call on people as hand raised. There was a note here to use the crime prevention officer as a key liaison within the community. I'm going to read through some of these that are kind of single point. Katie Barnes, go ahead.
Hi. I think I would have a little bit of concern with that. I would not want to take crime prevention officer, away from other duties that they are very helpful for, especially like in our communities. We are in contact with them probably on a weekly basis. I just would not want these short-term rental issues to take, just overwhelm them and then take over their position. So I would want to make sure that there's some type of balance.
Got it. Chief, do you want to add to that or respond to that?
And thank you for that feedback. And you do make a great point. We have noticed, a lot of their bandwidth is spent on these types of issues. I will just clarify one thing, though, that it is very much their responsibility to be connected to all community related issues, and short-term rentals have become a part of that equation. So I'm very comfortable with the responsibility set being with the district staff and crime prevention officer, crime prevention police aide. If at any point, as we do workload assessment, if we believe that it's really grown to that degree, then we can propose other staff to assist with that in the districts. But I want my CPOs very connected to their neighborhoods, to their block watch captains, to all things that are happening in their district and in their communities. And this has been certainly an issue that's been very important to our communities. So, but yes, I agree. We do monitor their workload very carefully.
So 2 thoughts I'm thinking is maybe we need to think about this recommendation within the context of recommendation 1A. And Chief, have you thought at all about how you would see the crime prevention officer interfacing with the response team?
Yes, very much so. That response team would be, sort of the front line, much like my patrol staff is now. And then sometimes, and I know this can sometimes be frustrating, just recognize that it is the system at work, that when our officers are out dealing with the problems in the moment, they're then forwarding that information back to the district staff and crime prevention officer, who then has already sort of established the foundational history with a particular property or properties. And then many times that, and then working very closely with code enforcement. So many times that additional enforcement, if you will, of the nuisance party violations and so on is coming a day or two after the original call for service. And that's really just sort of the system working well. What I'm really trying to address with the response team is getting out there faster in the moment, getting more of that customer service to our citizens and their concerns about what's happening in their neighborhood. They will also build that foundation just working in that environment. And so some of that load can be taken off the CPO as far as all the tracking and so on. And as you said earlier, Mr. Stockwell, a lot of this has yet to be developed. We're in the early phases of what this looks like. By the time we're ready to deploy on this, we will have really all that workload mapping done and who's going to be responsible for what. But I do want my district staff very plugged in to their neighborhoods. And if there's a short-term rental issue in one of their neighborhoods, I want them really very connected to it and connected to the residents that are dealing with it.
So I know a number of our working group members have been working specifically with properties that they've been concerned about in their neighborhoods. So how it might work is that they would contact the police department, the crime prevention officer might work with them to better understand it, and then refer that over to the response team, so that when when they anticipate a problem occurring, they could actually be on scene and handling that. Is that? And they would do the follow-up to something like that?
Very much so. My district commanders have staff meetings weekly to address lots of different kinds of neighborhood programs. I would see the members of this group attending, being, just from a representative standpoint, assigned to the different districts to represent in those meetings, just so that they're up to speed on the latest information and they're sharing information back and forth.
Very good, thanks. I asked that question because I think it tied back to a question that Ian Jeffrey had asked earlier. Ian, you have your hand raised now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Chief Slavin just answered my question, but so we've got all of this stuff together and we develop these dashboards and these rapid response groups and all that kind of stuff. In the future, what's the mechanism to say to the work group, hey, this is working great, we need to tweak this one, kind of a feedback as to how successful were we? And maybe Chief Slavin just mentioned that about the block watch captains perhaps being part of or communicating with the crime prevention officers.
So as far as sort of measuring our effectiveness, the district commanders will sort of be looking for that in real time. Of course, my supervisor, the chief of police, we provide regular reports, monthly reports about how we're doing with this issue. We monitor the activity. If we build this response team, we would monitor their activity. They would have to generate monthly reports that we would look at, measure their effectiveness that way. But I think specifically, Mr. Jeffrey, if you're asking about reporting back to this work group, of course, the chief, is always updating our city manager and of course, members of council. We have members of council on the working group. I'm certain we can create that mechanism just because you've obviously all been so invested in this to make sure you're seeing if it's effective or not. I can tell you that I'm kind of a data guy. So if I see some things that we're not doing well or we could be doing better, I like to make those tweaks right away. So we're always sort of measuring our efficiency and effectiveness, but reporting back to the working group, I think is a great idea and certainly something we should do.
And Chief and Ian, let me follow up on that as well. I think that may be something that's currently missing from the recommendations that we may want to insert somewhere, some mechanism to evaluate how well these recommendations are working once implemented and make changes as needed. And so I appreciate you raising that. I wrote a note down to explore that. Maybe we could revisit that later, perhaps after we get through the rest of these.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So you see as already referenced here, the one about the dashboard. I think one thing that we particularly need to talk about and figure out through is this recommendation 1E on using a 24/7 hotline to triage enforcement efforts with the developed script to appropriately route incoming complaints. And there's a comment in there about the response team and how it might work in this. I think one of the things that has been mentioned before by the working group, but we're also trying to figure out and kind of figure out how to get this right is we do have a 24/7 hotline on all police related issues, and that's 911 or even the non-emergency line. I think the question is how might a hotline integrate with that? And does anybody have any thoughts on that? Thoughts on it, or do you have the same types of concerns, or would you feel from your standpoint that adding an additional hotline might be helpful?
This is Scott.
Yeah,
I just think that there's a propensity for individuals, neighbors, homeowners to call 911. I agree with Ian on that. When it's gotten to the point where it's out of control, at least from their perspective. But what we don't want to do, I don't think any of us are, we know that their 911 is a true emergency, a car accident, a robbery, whatever it may be. We don't want to tie up that line. So I think what was trying to be implied here, at least, was that there was a different number specifically related to nuisance parties, that yes, it's important, these people are in trouble. If there's a, if they're outside and banishing weapons and doing those sort of things, absolutely call 911. But there's another route that might get a little bit more quicker response. Maybe that's just tied into this new development of this 6 officers, sergeant, and code enforcement, that it can be a 24/7 hotline, however it goes to them, the information you get to. So I think that's what we're hitting at. And please tell me if I'm misreading.
No, good comment. Carl, go ahead.
Well, I agree with Scott. I think that creating extra work or creating some kind of hotline that's just a waste of time is useless. I do think we have to defer to the police group that's managing that, how best to get information from the public. And that's where my confusion lies in terms of the consumers. I mean, the residents, they know, all right, I can call the non-emergency line for the police department. Somebody says I can call code enforcement. Gosh, I better get on my computer and figure out how to do that. If there's a simple way to increase communication between the stakeholders in the city with the group that's trying to help them, I think that's a great way of aiding the residents. But I don't think creating, staff says,
Yeah, very good.
So sorry,
You dropped off a little bit there,
sorry
Carl.
about that.
Sorry.
Okay.
Chief Slavin, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you all. Great suggestions. And you're exactly right. We do have a non-emergency number, and people use it all the time in the way that you are describing. I would suggest that as the best solution for what's being proposed here, as opposed to an additional or some sort of new hotline. Just calling the non-emergency number. The dispatchers and communications staff get those calls, and they get prioritized appropriately. So that would be the way to go. There are other methods that I know Mr. Stockwell's talked about with Scottsdale Easy and things like that. If it's something that's not occurring in the moment, but you just want to report it. So there are I think a lot of ways to communicate with us now. I'm not sure. My opinion is I don't think we need an additional one.
So it seems to me that some of the conversation around here are things that we can talk about more in the recommendation on improving communication to residents about how to handle a situation. So maybe we'll keep on moving then. There is 1F is working with citizens, making the complaint to close the loop and ensure concerns have been addressed. Even in today's meeting, we've heard that we need to do better on that. The next one we have, you recall the question, I think that Ian Jeffrey made about the staff report, that was the effort of this 1G, the Business Regulation Task Force, the two-person task force that's currently working on that. I think one of the things we need to do is evaluate that as well to see if that's working and that should continue, or if it should morph into a different format. Certainly we're gonna, if we're effective, we're gonna reach the point where most, if not all, of the short-term rentals are identified. And then we kind of shift to making sure that that complaint and emergency contact information is updated and current. So that may shift a little bit. That's at least the thrust of that one, is to, and maybe that's the where we kind of expand a little bit to make sure that we're evaluating how we're measuring effectiveness of all of these efforts. And then a comment was made at a prior meeting about evaluating whether an association comprised of and funded by short-term owners could assist with monitoring and enforcement, including private security efforts. There is a comment that it could be created, may be beneficial, would be difficult for the city to make it a requirement. And then there's an observation there about some of the challenges we see with private security, particularly when they're trying to help with something that ultimately will require a police officer to enforce. Scott, go ahead.
Yes, thanks. I think I brought that up just as some food for thought. I do agree with that. Now that we have this idea of having a dedicated police resource to this, if that was for me, I agree, and I'd like to withdraw that recommendation.
All right. And again, if there's no objection, then we'll withdraw that one. I see Shane has his hand raised. Shane, did you want to jump in?
I did. We have over on the attendee side of the meeting, we have a phone number. I wanted to see if we could just take a moment to allow that person to speak to see who it may be in case it's one of our missing members.
It does look like David Mason's phone number.
Okay, I will press allow to talk then. And Mr. Mason, if that is you, you should be able to press *6 to unmute yourself anytime you want to jump in. And then *6 will mute you again. But I will go ahead and note that and put a note here for this recommendation as we keep moving. Thank you, Brent.
All right. David, is that you? All right. The good thing is he should be able to listen in as we continue to have the conversation. All right. Anything else under enforcement?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Go ahead, David.
Great. Okay, great. I'm sorry I was late getting in. I'm here in Virginia, so it's a pain. So I was just listening in. Want to let you know I was here.
Okay.
But appreciate
Excellent.
all the comments. I'll hold my comments until later.
Okay, thank you. The next one is this working with the short-term rental industry to increase properties providing emergency contact, improve voluntary compliance, ensure input from the industry is received prior to implementing recommendations. So the first recommendation here we have is really, I think we talked about this a little bit last time in the conversations that the council members and myself and Brad Lundahl had with a couple of the online lodging marketplace platforms. And the key pieces are listed here. If any comment, feedback on that. It is noted in the staff report that Airbnb reached out to us. There was a window of opportunity to go out and contact their Scottsdale properties this week. So we are working on a communication with regarding that, and we'll be able to, hopefully we should be able to see by your next meeting whether there was any effectiveness from that. But what they were talking about is not only sending out an email, but also on their owner or host dashboard, it would have a pop-up and it wouldn't go away till you either followed the link or deliberately decided not to register. Yeah, go ahead. David, were you?
I was just saying, in terms of working with Airbnb, I think it's a good idea to try to work with them because they have access to things. You have to remember that they don't have access to everything. And I sent you that one article about how Airbnb was trying to cover up anything that happened. So I think if they're trying to work with us, let's take advantage of it.
Excellent.
But
Thank you.
just be careful.
Understood. Thank you. Scott, you have your hand raised?
Yes, thanks. And I just wanted to get some feedback on the press release from Airbnb and VRBO this week that they were going to team up to shut down repeat party houses, and they were asking the next number 3 through 10, I guess, players in the marketplace to do the same. Clearly, they're the 2 heavyweights, so someone's gotten 2 of them. And I do appreciate that. And hopefully the platforms are starting to hear the feedback. I'm glad that the city council or some of the city council met with them. It looks like they're getting the message. My question is, I like the idea. I'm happy they're going to do that. Of course, this will create number 11 through 20 that won't abide by that, but at least the big players in it have started to crack down on party houses and refuse to list them. I don't know if it's appropriate, and I'm just asking the question, is there something we should do with that to say that we, short of an endorsement, that, yeah, we participate in this good neighbor plan, Scottsdale supports their cracking down on party houses, so that we give them encouragement to continue to do what they said they're going to do via press release. And I do agree with Mr. Mason that we should tread carefully, but I just want to make sure everyone was aware of that, and I think that's something we might be able to leverage in the future.
So maybe that might be adding to the recommendation a statement that says to support positive efforts by platforms to proactively address party houses.
Yeah, something along the lines that
okay.
Well, we don't endorse necessarily, but we certainly Scottsdale welcomes this. We're not going to get rid of it. It's going to happen. So let's get with the good players. And if the bad players aren't there, just they don't get that much more cachet out of it.
Okay. Thank you. Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. I'm glad Scott brought that up because the question I had when I saw that was then, is there any coordination with them to have them report back to the municipalities, those party houses that they've removed, so that there's, not just jumping onto a different platform and continuing to do that?
Good question. They didn't actually talk to us about it when we met with them. That news release came out after that meeting. But maybe we need to add to this one. I mean, it certainly is there maintaining regular contact with platforms to address new and continuing concerns, but perhaps we could expand it to ask them to communicate with the city about properties which they have, proactively addressed, or party houses that they have proactively addressed. Something along that line.
Thank you.
Okay, and that was 2A. All right, we're just trying to make sure and capture everything. Bobby, go ahead.
Just a quick question on that point is, if Airbnb and VRBO give the city that information, how would the city and or those tell somebody that they couldn't market on another third-party site?
I didn't think the comment was telling them that they couldn't market it, but contacting the city so the city's response team could use our emergency contact, complaint contact, and notify them that we were aware that they were intending to operate as a party house and remind them of what the city's rules are and what the penalties are for non-compliance. I guess something more along that line.
Yeah, yes, that's what I was getting at, Bobby. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
I have a question. If there's anybody can hear me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. If Airbnb and VRBO are going to do this wonderful thing for us, since they're in fact admitting that there is a problem with that, are they going to report how they are doing with getting people to register their sites? Are they going to report that back to us so we know that something is indeed happening? Or are they just going to sit and claim credit for the fact, look, we're trying to get people to register? Are they actually going to do that? Report to the state, let us know, are there people maintaining their registrations? What are they going to do for us in terms of telling us what they're doing? I think we should ask them to do that as a matter of course. I think that should be part of the announcement that they're going to tell us what's going on within their systems, who is registered, who's not registered, and provide us some means to just get some information. That's my only comment.
Thank you. I think I think that was somewhat implied in there. I think we could certainly ask them about that. I know that in the conversation that we had with them, at least one of them in particular was particularly focused on measuring the effectiveness of those campaigns. You know, to do it and then to evaluate it and then to do it some more to see how we could get toward higher compliance. And certainly we would also work to extend that to other platforms as well. Bobby, did you raise your hand again, or was that from before? Okay. I think that is the one recommendation in this area, right? So the next recommendation is around using technology to identify and increase emergency contacts and compliance from short-term rentals. We have talked to 3 products. We have another meeting set up with a 4th. I shared with the group last time that I intended to get that information out to you. I was not able to do so because I realized I did not have kind of similar information from each one of the companies that we met with. But I will commit to fleshing this one out with a little bit more information so you have that before your next meeting. And we'll, as I said, have one more meeting at that point. I think we're really trying to figure out still is, you know, what combination of Whitney's group kind of proactively identifying and contacting and the platforms proactively asking their owners and hosts to provide emergency and complaint contact information. How far can we get without having to spend additional resources for a separate technology platform? I think that's the key that we're trying to figure out here. I think we're trying to go through the less expensive solutions first. I guess that's probably the best way to say it. Bobby, go ahead.
Thank you. So just to kind of clarify, the ultimate goal with this piece is to figure out who the owner is and if they're registered with the city, has the short-term rental registered with the city, and that the online platforms would assist in who the owner and the contact is. Is that kind of the thrust of this?
Well, certainly the purpose of this would be to identify and increase the emergency and complaint contacts, right? That's the purpose of it, so that the city has the information so that we can contact them if a problem arises and so on and so forth. The challenge is right now, we don't really have a source of that. So that's why Whitney's team is going through and looking for matches between the county assessor's database and the property address to see, oh, this is such and such a property LLC, so it's highly likely that it's a short-term rental. It's not registered with the county. It's not registered. You know, it hasn't provided contact information. So let's get them to do it. Also to double check to make sure that they do have a TPT, transaction privilege tax license, trying to do all that. There are a number of technology companies that have come into this gap and said, we can help provide that basically by crawling the internet and finding and looking for postings, and then cross-matching that with other, mapping software and address software to try and identify which ones are likely to be short-term rentals and tracking it. That's kind of what that does for us. And so it's trying to find a way to identify them when we can't do it any other way. Does that more clearly explain that? Okay.
Yeah. So, but the low-hanging fruit would be for the city of Scottsdale to get that information from the Department of Revenue, right? So with the TPT taxes, that information could be scraped immediately from Department of Revenue and then cross-referenced with what's registered right now. So for example, if the city was to go to the Department of Revenue and say, hey, how many, or what are the addresses of short-term rentals in Scottsdale? I mean, could the city get that information?
I'm going to ask Whitney to comment on that. That was the first thing that we tried, because early in the working group discussions, we talked about that they're required to have a TPD license. We know that many of them are because they're doing it through the platform. And we thought, oh, we'll get that address information, look at it against our database and contact people that haven't done that yet. My recollection was that was easier said than done. So we've gone to other mechanisms. Whitney, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, we tried that from the beginning. And from what I'm being told from our tax manager, it can't. There's not a short-term rental classification, only a rental category in general, if that helps at all.
Yes, that helps because that helps remind me that we couldn't just get the short-term rentals out of that. We would also be getting all the long-term rentals as well. So it wasn't, then we would be looking at all the rentals in Scottsdale and asking all of them if they're short-term rentals or not. And so that's why I think they went to the other method. Scott, go ahead. Thank you, Whitney.
Yes. Is it possible to consider on the listing on the platform that they do put the Arizona privileged tax license number on there as other information and give us the ability to go out and capture that off of the website? It'd be just, disclosure at the end of wouldn't be prominent, but it'd be a place that would say we are in fact in compliance with the tax laws of Arizona. And here's the tax number. Helps with the compliance. If you find people that are fraudulent, it helps with that. I don't think that would be a big deal for them to do. So just a suggestion.
And Scott, my recollection is that is something that we do require them to do. The challenge is if they don't have it on their listing and they're not, they haven't provided their contact information, that's harder to track down. I think you've identified one of the challenges that we're coming into, and I think that was actually one of the specific situations that Whitney's team had identified on that staff report.
Yes, thanks. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. This one, we kind of transitioning from item to item. This is the one about making sure that the city is collecting all allowable revenue from short-term rentals and analyzing whether fines could be increased. This first one is related to that. So as properties are identified, compare those with transaction privilege tax licenses with the Arizona Department of Revenue. So Shane will have to fix that to ensure that they are paying taxes. And so that's what the task force and the business regulation unit is working on that. I'm going to keep going through these and I'll stop whenever I get a hand raised. Improve the process for issuing notices of violation and the process for handling appeals for police services fees to limit the number of fees that need to be reduced. And this item is actually covered later under recommendation 5, so we'll defer to that. But this also was an issue that was mentioned in a recent audit of the code enforcement unit. And so this is something that we are working between the police department, code enforcement, and business regulations to address. Then I think the next one is probably the one you all are most interested in. Maybe we should have put that one up at the top. But that was the issue of reviewing all fines against state maximum to ensure fines are set at the maximum amount. So one of the things that could be done is creating a sliding scale of fines that are $750, $150, $2,000, and $2,500. And just as a reminder, the $2,500 is the maximum that the state legislature has allowed us to charge for owners, and then a $250, $500, $1,000, and $2,000 for occupants. And that would all be based on the number of prior violations. So it'd be an escalation based on prior violations. There also could be in here some creative solutions that use fines in combination with other measures, such as agreeing to employ a noise detection software in exchange for a reduction fine the first time, for first-time offenders or attending a course on best practices or something like that. So, and there's a explanation there as well. We're trying to be responsive to the comments that have been made by the working group about fines. Any questions or comments about this? Scott, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I do understand the limits on violations. However, if there are multiple violations, are we able to fine or charge a service fee that's equal to, let's say, the noise ordinance, the 500, 1500, 2500 that's currently set up. And in addition to that, you've left your garbage out for a week and a half. It's piled up. Now you have a violation of the refuse ordinance. In other words, and again, this is food for thought, throw the book at them, particularly when they get into their third and fourth violation. And it's not just one violation for noise or for trash or for parking. Can we add those in the congregate and increase that violation fine? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to let Luis respond to that one.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So the maximum fine is per charge. So let's say, and this would relate to like nuisance parties. Let's say on Monday they had a nuisance party, Tuesday they had a nuisance party. Those would be separate violations or charges, so they could receive a separate fine. So let's say that a Monday was the first offense, they get $750. Then and a week later they get another one. It would be $1,500 for the next fine. So it's not a maximum per property; it's charged. So given your specific example, let's say they violated the solid waste ordinance and the nuisance party ordinance. The fines would be based on whatever that particular ordinance called for, and they could be held responsible and receive a fine for each violation. Taking that hypothetical further, let's say they had a nuisance party, they had failed to register and didn't comply. They had a trash violation, and let's throw in there that they also had some sort of property maintenance. They could receive an individual fine on any of those, on all of those violations if they were convicted. So
Thank you, Luis.
that's already in place, basically.
Thank you. Bobby Rush, go ahead.
Just real quick on that. So the way it's set up or would be set up are there any amnesties or warnings that go out first, or would it be at the first offense regardless that there would be a fine?
So for homeowners, it should, so someone owns a short-term vacation rental. It's possible you could be the best short-term vacation rental operator of all time and still, occasionally have a nuisance party. So basically, we have to put you on notice that nuisance parties are occurring. So generally, on the first nuisance party at a given property, well, the tenants or the occupants or the renters could be cited for having a nuisance party. We would have to put the owner on notice. So basically, the sliding scale for nuisance parties would start on a second violation. So basically, and that's how the ordinance is set up right now, where you get one freebie. We put you on notice that your property has nuisance parties, and if you fail to take steps and nuisance parties continue, that's when you get a police service fee or you get a citation. So I think that answers your question.
So then the next question would be, would you get a warning for every individual violation?
No, that's going to depend. So it depends on the violation. So right now, for example, the working group is seeing statistics on people that the number of code enforcement cases where they hadn't registered their complaint or contact information. And typically on those types of violations, code enforcement tries to get voluntary compliance through notice of violation. So it just like the property owner that has high weeds, usually they'll issue a notice of violation. If they don't comply, they'll get a citation. So it is possible to go right to citation, but the general current city practice would be if it's a correctable violation, it doesn't jeopardize the public safety, give people an opportunity to correct before issuing a citation.
All right. Thank you. Scott, did you have another question, comment, observation?
Yes, just one question for Luis, so I'm clear on this. Who gets the freebie? The owner of the property, the operator of the property, the people that are staying at the STR?
So
how does that work?
The owner and operator would get the freebie. And the reason is just like, and this is an extreme example, but someone could come to your property and commit a serious crime, right? Well, you're obviously not going to be held responsible to that because you had no knowledge of it. So the idea here is, or the concept is, so that the operator or owner is intentionally or knowingly violating the law because they've been put on notice that, hey, you had a nuisance party already at this property, and in the future, you will be held responsible if you have additional ones. So, because I think we would all agree that it's possible to be the best operator possible and have some rogue rental one time where, despite your best efforts, they created a nuisance. That's the intent, because we have to prove that people knowingly violated the law usually. So that's the concept there. But so let's say on Monday there was a nuisance party. You're put on notice by the city, and then Tuesday there's another one. Then you have already been on notice, and you'd be subject to citation.
And Luis, let me clarify as well, because my understanding is that if we have the emergency contact information, we get a complaint from a neighbor that there's a party going on at said property, we notify the property owner there and give them an hour or whatever to address that situation. And if that situation continued that evening without being addressed, that could also constitute as notice, right?
Potentially, yes, depending on how the ordinance is written. There's also a requirement in state law if, and this is another reason why it's an incentive for short-term rental owners to make sure they register the complaint information, that if there are any citations issued associated with the STR, the city's supposed to, if they have the complaint information on file, notify them within 7 days that a citation was issued. I guess the concept there is to give owners the ability to correct potential problems at their properties.
All right, thank you, Luis. I'm just still trying to jibe the stopping what in the moment is happening by the people who are staying at the property. Eventually, we can go after the owner, but how do we make it painful for the people that are actually doing the violation? Otherwise, they couldn't care less, frankly.
They can be immediately cited. There's no grace period for them, as long as the elements of the violation are there, meaning what are the, it's seriously disrupted the neighborhood or what have you, as it's currently written. They also, if it's an extreme, a very serious situation, there's a state criminal statute called disorderly conduct about disturbing the peace, and that can be used by the police in certain situations. So in terms of the people that are actually at the property, the police do have some immediate ability to cite them, have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Luis, can you comment on why the recommendation has a lower amount for the people that are actually the occupants, people that are actually holding the party?
Yes, sir. So what we've been, there have been some 140 of these police service fee notice of violations issued, and to my knowledge, none of them have been repeats by occupants. So you have certain properties where you have had several nuisance parties. So the repeat violators appear to be the owners who continue to allow these parties to occur. So quite a few of these occupants are from out of state, or and they're defaulting on paying their police service fees. So difficult to try to collect those fees when people default and have no intention to return here. So and I think some people are also just filing appeals because, and right now these are outside of the court system with the, we're going to change it so it goes into the court system, so that will improve some of this enforcement. But right now, some people are just appealing because, you know, they don't necessarily disagree with what occurred, but they think the fee is too high. So we think it'll actually be more cost effective, and we'll actually collect more in fines for the occupants than we do now. And then there is the teeth if you have repeat occupants, but to my knowledge, there hasn't been an offense by repeat occupants except for
Owners.
Owners. And I think there was one incident where some occupants rented a place for a weekend, and maybe the police were called out a couple times. So that would be that one exception, but there are tools for the police to deal with that immediately.
Got it. And that explains the difference between the levels for each one. The occupant at the 4th level could still be 2,500, right?
That's true. And these are minimum. The court will always have the opportunity to accept, even on a first offense, assess a higher fee up to $2,500.
Okay.
These are minimums.
Thank you. Carl, you were up next, but you lowered your hand. So
yeah, my question mainly it comes into number 5.
Okay, so we'll do it under
Luis,
there then.
Yeah, if Luis can, the next time, we'll talk about it then.
Okay, Bobby, do you have one more under 4C? He has also lowered his hand. Okay.
I thought I unmuted myself. Just really quick. So maybe I'm confused. Can someone just clarify really quick what the difference between a call for service versus a violation is, and if they are the same thing or if they're different?
Sure.
This is Luis.
Go ahead.
Yeah, they are different. So a call for service just means that the police have been called by a reporting party, usually a resident, that something's occurring. So the officer has to go out there, make an assessment before he issues any sort of notice of violation or citation. He needs to find that all the elements of the offense are there before they can issue it. So it just by way of example, let's say the resident said there's an illegally parked vehicle in front of their house. The police get out there and the vehicle's gone. So there's no violation anymore to prove. So in terms of, let's say, a nuisance party, let's say a police officer gets out there and they try to contact the reporting party, that they're not able to. They go to the source of the alleged party or noise, and it's all quiet. Even though there was a call for service, they wouldn't be able to issue a notice of violation or citation because there's no evidence of anything. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so just merely showing up doesn't trigger these fines.
No, because they have to, and even once the officer issues a citation, it wouldn't trigger the fines. Then there's a court, you're cited into court, you have the right to, you could, at that point, you could decide to plead responsible and pay whatever the fine in the court assessed, or you can ask for a hearing before a judge where we would have to prove that the violation occurred.
All right, Carl, do you have a question at this point?
Well, I think I'll just make it a comment because I was going to bring it up in the next on section 5, but this is an overarching theme that I believe we really need to address, which is, and Luis made it very clear, whether it's parked car or or an unruly party. Okay. And I guess the proof will be in the pudding down the next 6 months or so as the police group comes together and they're more educated as to understanding the true effect the repetitive issues here have on the stakeholder, city of Scottsdale, because whether it's a parked car or a party, but let's take the nuisance party, for example, and depending on our response time, it is, in my mind, very clear based upon the public comment and the amazing amount of feedback we've had, that there's been numerous times that there's been significant challenges, that there's not been a situation that we have been able to write a citation for whatever reason, as Luis has explained. And yet, on the other hand, we say, oh, no, it's okay. We may have to come out to your location 30 times, yet we never were able to prove that there was a problem. But we finally did actually catch you in the act because we got there on time, the system's working, and we see that it is a true disturbance, and the neighbors that have been a little bit crazy about it because they keep calling without they perceive any act on our part. Then it goes through the courts and they're okay, this is a citation. Okay, but we're going to give you a freebie the first time. So to me, it's I don't understand that the code actually says that ignorance of the law is okay, or that breaking the law is okay. I don't get why we have to give them, when I speed and the police officer pulls me over, he gives me a ticket. Oh, I didn't know there was a stop sign there, but you still get a ticket. I'm responsible for it. It may not even feel fair from my perspective, but I still have to pay my responsibility as a citizen. So I obviously am not educated properly as to the code and how it's written, but I don't understand the idea of, oh, no, it's unfair, once Luis explains how onerous and how difficult it is to actually get a citation, to where then you can then be given a freebie. Or maybe am I misunderstanding this?
Well,
I can address that
Go
real
ahead, Luis.
quick. So generally, ignorance of the law is a misnomer in a lot of cases. So there's generally two types of offenses under the law. There's strict liability offenses that don't require a mental state. For example, not paying your taxes or speeding. But there's also, most times the courts want to see that there's a mental state. So you're intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly violating the law. Now, the issue that we have to deal with is proving that the owner knowingly permitted this nuisance party to occur. To mitigate that and address your concern, like Brent said, we could potentially do it. Hey, we notify the owner, and they have an hour to deal with this issue. And if they don't, so on a first violation, they could get a citation under those circumstances. But it's we have to have a balanced approach where we can show that owners have knowledge by putting them on notice. We also obviously want to protect the neighborhoods, and we also have to provide due process for any violators. So with what you said, we can rewrite the ordinance in such a way that putting on notice could be that same evening, and build into the ordinance a time frame for them to come and deal with the situation. And if they don't, then they could be cited.
All right. Thank you very much, Shane. Let's keep moving through here. And I know we're already at 5 o'clock, but I think it's critical that we get through this. And I know a number of the major ones are right here in section 5. So the recommendation was evaluating whether ordinances could be strengthened to eliminate loopholes and improve ability to enforce. There's an overall one here saying to look at other cities' ordinances, including the comment about the 1 hour emergency contact, which is actually the next one. Under B, strengthening the city's emergency contact provision to require the emergency contact respond in person to a short-term rental within 1 hour for emergencies defined within the ordinance, including nuisance parties and unruly gatherings. That does appear to be allowable under state law. and would have been the code section relating to complaints and emergency contacts. Bobby, go ahead.
Quick, so that we could get that to apply to short-term rentals, and it would not need to apply to long-term rentals, that a landlord would have to respond within an hour if there's something crazy going on at a long-term rental.
My understanding was it would be in the nuisance party ordinance. Luis, is that correct?
Yeah. So for emergency contacts, in 9-539B1, there's a section that allows us to require an emergency contact, which is different from the section that allows us to have a person that can handle our complaints. So this requirement, I know it's long-winded answer, would only apply to short-term rentals and not long-term rentals.
But I think to Bobby's point, this is something that we could apply to long-term rentals as well, conceptually.
I'm not sure that that's the case, because
okay.
It's a specific authority that we're given over short-term rentals and not long-term rentals.
Yeah, but they haven't preempted the city's ability to the same degree with regards to long-term rentals, correct? Or
that's an open question, and I would, and especially given the circumstances, I don't think that it would be an area that the city should try to impose on long-term rentals.
Okay, so it seems that we clearly have the ability to do it under short-term rentals.
In terms of the nuisance, and certainly the nuisance party problem, while we have had some long-term rentals in there, they actually haven't been a huge number. There's also probably been as many owner-occupied as long-term rentals.
Certainly. All right. Any other, Shane, can you go up just slightly so we have that recognition? Anything about that 1 hour rule? I know that had been a topic of some conversation earlier, so we definitely have that in there. All right. The next one, we've been talking about the police service fee. So that is basically eliminating the police service fee portion of the nuisance and party ordinance and replacing it with civil sanctions through citations filed in city court. So that would help with improved enforceability. And then also the other thing that had been talked about is the time period for 3 or more violations. So that could be within a 2 hour period as well. Okay. And then another one that we've talked a lot about is the issue of unreasonable noise. So this would be adding to the nuisance party and unruly gathering ordinance language that defines excessive noise as noise caused by a nuisance party or unruly gathering that disturbs the peace and quiet of a residence or neighborhood from a perspective of a reasonable person of normal sensibilities. I'm sure there's some legal reasons for phrasing it that way. A sound level meter could be used, but not required, and that it be a rebuttable presumption that noise levels over a certain threshold would be considered excessive for a nuisance party. And so one of the things we'd still have to figure out, this is also another ordinance that the city is working on right now, is to figure out exactly what those DBC or equivalent base level decibels are. So that would be something that would be figured out, but we could move forward on this. Bobby, sorry, not Debbie.
Oh, so I was almost a Debbie. Just real quick, how would we just detect that, the decibels?
Decibels would be with the sound level meter. So the police officers are trained on the usage of that because it's already in our noise ordinances related to live entertainment and liquor serving establishments. So it would be doing something similar to that for nuisance parties as well. Okay, Carl, go ahead.
To add to that, I think it's important that we get that this section gets specific in terms of the recommendation to council, and it should be specific to the point to where the noise decibel is mandated for certain time periods. And I think it's in there, but it needs to be very clear as to, you know, a noise decibel over this point from the hours of 10 to 10 p.m. or whatever is important. And I don't know, are they working on that, Brent, to be able to bring clarity to, because I know Paradise Valley has it, right? And I don't see why we can't follow in their footsteps in the way they've crafted those noise decibels. And then the second part of that question is, that's a noise meter reading that a police officer would take from the street, I'm assuming. But what about a next door neighbor that has a sound meter on their wall, on the property line, right? It's their property. They take a sound measure reading. Is that admissible in terms of presenting that to the police officer? Because the police officer wouldn't necessarily go, you know, solid. A house will block noise, right? And so the noise from the street might be completely different than from the property line in the backyard of the adjacent property. Has that been articulated?
Chief, go ahead. Yeah. Thank you, Carl.
Thanks, Carl. This is Rich Slavin. Based on what the question you're asking, it would just go into the standard investigation the officer would do when he's there. So in addition to taking the reading from the noise meter from the street, if that person is, you know, say the neighbor is the one that's actually called us, of course, we would interview them. We would go into their backyard. We would try and experience what they're complaining about. And then if it meets the law, then we would take enforcement action based on a lot of things, the time of day, how many neighbors are being disturbed, all kinds of things. So this is specific to noise and the nuisance party, which is why it's written so closely around the particular decibel reading. But a police officer is going to evaluate more than that when they're out there in the way of even a misdemeanor of disorderly conduct. So there's a lot of things they're going to evaluate when they're out there, and they're going to take into account the caller and what they're specifically complaining about.
Perfect.
Also keep in mind that the reporting party might need to testify in court themselves in terms of their use of scientific evidence. The evidentiary standard needs to be calibrated, trained, and stuff like that. So while the resident will testify why they think it's unreasonable and how it disturbed their peace or so on, their noise reading themselves, unless they happen to be certified and trained and they could prove calibration, would probably not be admissible.
So Luis, to Carl's point, could we, I mean, what's the value of clarifying a certain time period versus having it at any time period? Is there?
So you could do that. So you could have different different decibel levels that assume a violation or presume a violation based on the time periods. So after 10 p.m., for example, or after 11 p.m., maybe instead of 60 decibel readings, it's 60. And I'm just throwing those out as random numbers. I'm not saying what the appropriate numbers, but you could have, just like our construction noise ordinance our construction activity ordinance, actually, you can't begin construction until certain hours, depending on the time of year. You could have an ordinance that set different decibel readings for different time periods.
Thank you. Bobby.
And just to piggyback on that, could it also be done by zones? I mean, there's properties down in Old Town, for example, that have tons of noise way after 10 o'clock, but it wouldn't be, I would say, congruent with if you're in, Central Scottsdale or North Scottsdale.
So yes and no. The beauty of the way this is written is that it has to be from the perspective of a reasonable person. So it's a rebuttable presumption that you have a certain noise level, and let's say it's based on the hours. That would certainly be taken into account if the noise was in like the entertainment district. It's normal for it to be noisy there. So an officer would have to take that into account when they're deciding whether the nuisance part in the ordinance applied. Generally, the nuisance parties, though, are generally in residential areas. So it already kind of is built in there to take into account with, since it has to be unreasonable, and the officers can have to take into time of day what the area is normally like before they make that determination anyway.
Thank you. Ian, go ahead.
Thank you. I did listen to the May 11th council meeting where they did discuss noise ordinance, and I kind of felt it was still rather squishy. It wasn't, to take Carl's point, it wasn't specific. Okay, at 10 p.m., it's 50 decibels at the property line, boom. I think this is important as part of the rollout so that it's in our tool bag and it's not subjective, it's very specific so that we are all very consistent with this part.
Excellent, thanks. So I think what we could do is we could explore the hours comment that was made and put that in there, and we can talk about that next time. Certainly, if the council is interested in this recommendation going forward, they would also be saying, yes, please, prepare an ordinance, go through a public process, and include these elements in it. So we don't have to have it completely perfect now. It's still going to go through a process. I think we've talked about this a little bit, this creating opportunities to allow waivers or mitigation and diversion of fines if they take certain steps, all trying to prevent future problems. That's what that one's about. There's a broad one here, really looking at the data, at all the complaints that we have to see if there's a need for additional regulations in some of these different areas. I know I did a quick scan of the ones that came in through Scottsdale Easy reporter problem system, and it was seeming to me that a lot of them were related to trash related issues. And so certainly we could look at the Sedona ordinance, and I think Paradise Valley is also tightening their ordinance related to solid waste and short-term rentals. So that's what that one's about. And we hadn't forgot about the prior comment that was made about looking at the hotel laws and see if there's anything in there that is possibly applicable. This is the one we talked about, the owner information being required to be posted on site with notices sent to the owner. I think the other piece that we haven't really added in here is that this also provides a benefit to the neighbor to know who to contact if there are problems. It doesn't seem always to be the right thing to reach out to the short-term tenant, but rather to the owner directly to make sure that they're aware of what's going on. So we certainly talked about that a little bit earlier. There's a couple of them here that were listed, but staff has some pretty grave concerns about them. So those were noted there under H, I, and J. Seeing if there's any questions or comments about that. Let me keep going then, Shane. Also with K fell under that as well. So then getting into recommendation 6, this is, we talked a little bit about this earlier, improving the information and resources shared by the city to help inform residents about what the city can and can't do, make it easier for people to contact property managers, hosts. I think 3 fairly straightforward things there. Improving the information about how to report complaints, creating a how-to guide, and improving the interface with map and contact information to make it mobile friendly and easier to use. Carl, go ahead.
Sorry, I hate to do this. I'm going back, okay,
Sure.
To, I know staff's response on the maximum number of occupants per room. Enforcement of a stipulation would not be permissible without a warrant. Okay, I get it.
Shane, can you go up slightly so we can see it? Sorry.
Right, but here, we have ordinance that specifically states the number of, I'm not reading the ordinance, but it has to do with the maximum number of unrelated adults in the property.
Yeah,
okay,
it's in the zoning ordinance.
We get it. Okay. All right. So the ideas we come up with, staff says, no, that's not going to work. Nope, not going to work. Oh, so then someone please tell me how it's going to work. How are we going to enforce that ordinance?
So Carl, what if we did this? What if we improved, we added a recommendation that said to look into ways to, strengthen the ordinance section relating to occupancy limits and looking
Right.
for ways
I mean,
to
for
better
example,
enforce them.
let's say the neighbor, right. Let's say the neighbor across the street had a Ring doorbell, or they had 24-hour video surveillance, and they recorded the video. It's public property. They recorded who went in and who left from a certain time at night to the next time in the morning. I'm sure Luis will say, "Oh no, you can't do that because it's not calibrated properly." But my point is that, those are the things that could be admissible and could be given to the officer that comes out and says, well, here, look, this is who it's there. And we didn't ask for who they were or what their names were, but clearly, but how do you know if they're related or not? I mean, the ordinance, I think Bobby brought it up. It creates a lot of loose ends, and it's really difficult.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think we can definitely pull some of that together and have a recommendation that's addressing that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Milhaven, your hand is raised.
Thank you. I was going back to letting folks know. I'd love to see us do some workshops and invite block watch captains and interested parties to come to the workshop to educate them on what they can do and provide them the resources.
Okay, so we can build that in as well with neighborhood watch captains and conducting workshops. Okay. 7 is assisting HOAs and neighborhoods. And I think I missed this. We intended to take out the with CC&Rs. We were just trying to help neighborhoods. So Shane will have to take that out too, with information resources on how to manage it. So we have one here on preparing information to share with residents, HOAs, other similar neighborhood groups, including a neighborhood college class or educational mediation resources. We could build in the workshops here as well that Councilmember Milhaven just mentioned. So we can do that. Bobby.
Quick. So in terms of the emergency contact that is, I'm reading a few of these, is it designed like the mobile friendly? Is the goal there that if there's neighbors that they would be the ones calling this emergency contact, or they would file a complaint and then have someone from the city or police?
And let me clarify that. That is also typed in incorrectly. It wouldn't be the emergency contact person. It would be the property owner or a person to contact with complaints. There's two things that the vacation rentals ordinance requires. It requires you to provide the property owner and the person to contact for complaints, and also gives an emergency contact that should respond. The emergency contact is not available to the public, but the complaint person is. And
okay, gotcha.
yes,
that could be
today,
a unique situation.
someone could go to that and they could find that and they could contact the person associated with the property from the website to address that problem. Was that clarified, or did you want to?
That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. There's also a series of ones related to improving education about short-term rental best practices for residents, owners, and hosts. Working to identify what those best practices are, preparing information, including frequently asked questions, including a contact list and summary of laws to share with guests, and sharing that information to contacts. Also in here about preparing a course that anybody could take, imagine, but that first-time offenders would actually be required to take to curtail future violations. I think that's pulling something from the traffic enforcement handbook, I guess. And then requiring or recommending outdoor cameras or noise monitors for short-term rentals. So that is commented there. I'm looking for hand raises. And then the last set of recommendations are about sharing information with the state about how the city is using powers available to cities, advocating for necessary changes. So again, working with other cities, through the league and the online lodging marketplace platforms to come to agreement on needed changes, including modifications to the verified violation system. We certainly talked about that before in meetings, and developing improved information about short-term rentals and Scottsdale enforcement efforts to clearly state the case for additional oversight at the local level. Also kind of continuing to advocate for changes to state laws to give Scottsdale greater oversight. And Brad Lendl, I was thinking that we might want to add additional detail here about kind of what the city's, as you said before, kind of yardstick was for measuring that, so that at least we have that in there so that we could get some feedback on that perhaps. And this last one, recognizing that it's not just up to the city to be able to do this, that a citizen group could be formed to advocate as well. Comments, additional thoughts, things that are needed in here that aren't in here? Scott first and then Ian.
Yes, it's not a particular comment on anything in this document, but I do sense Carl's frustration with this process of we can't do anything different with STRs versus long-term rentals until today when we heard they actually can do something different. Have we, and this is maybe for Luis, and maybe it's a higher level question, but have we decided that we can just go and we're going to change these things in conjunction with a few other civic entities, Sedona, whatever it may be, other places in the valley, and say these are the regulations we're putting in place, and let's go to court and fight it out, because the legislature is not going to change until it takes a grassroots effort. So have we done that? We hear all about what we can't do, but we never hear about what we can do or we should do or press the issue. So apologize for getting on the soapbox, but maybe it's time to challenge exactly how valid this law is.
So one of you previously asked that question before. The legislature passed a law a couple of years ago, SP 1487, where if any member of the legislature believes that we have passed an ordinance that violates state law, they can make a complaint to the Attorney General's office. And if the Attorney General finds that we have violated the law, he can order the state treasurer to withhold our state share revenue, which is substantial. So generally, the only areas that a charter city have prevailed in has been in two areas in terms of fighting a statute like this. It's been elections. The city of Tucson has been successful, and in the disposition of our own property. Generally, in areas such as zoning, the courts have said that's a police power that's strictly regulated by the state legislature. We used to ban sign walkers in Scottsdale. We challenged that statute, and the courts held that was within the state's zoning power. They would probably hold the same thing here. So it would if the city council wanted us to file a lawsuit that challenges statute, they certainly could do so. But the chances of success are based on the current case law are virtually nil. It would not be a recommended approach to start passing and enforcing ordinances that violated state law without a court ruling first, because that could jeopardize the financial health of the city, as well as subject the city to other types of liability, including civil rights lawsuits.
So we could still advocate for the laws to be changed, like here in A and B, and citizen groups can certainly advocate for laws to be changed, but the city could not pass a law that violated state law without running the risk that we get that complaint and possibly losing our state share revenues.
Well, thanks for your precise answer. I highly doubt that they would withhold that, but I'm not a lawyer, so I'll defer to you.
And keep in mind, we've always stated it, and I get your frustration, but we've always stated what the state law does and what the limits of what we can do and what we can't do in terms of, based on some of the urgings of the working group. We've looked at things more closely, such as the emergency contact provision, which is different from the complaint position. So you may feel like we're not responding to what you're saying, but we're doing the best we can within the limits of the law. And, you know, and there's constitutional and evidentiary provisions that we have to follow. So we're not trying to make this difficult for you. We're doing the best we can.
No, I understand, Lisa, and thank you for that. It just sometimes feels as though we're nipping at the edges when in fact it's time to make a decision one way or the other, which way we're going to go. Because it's here and it's not going to change until it's changed at the state level. Otherwise, we can try and smooth out the edges. So I do appreciate your forthright answer.
And thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. I did have a correspondence with a citizen today that had sent a public comment into the working group, and they were just asking for clarification on the state law. And what they said at the end was, "Oh, does that mean that eventually a company could buy up every home in a neighborhood and convert every single one of them to short-term rentals?" And I said, "Yes, that's correct." And they basically said, "Oh yeah, we need to get this law changed." And so that, I think, as people understand, kind of the extreme limits of what could happen here, people are feeling like some of you as well. So I thank you. Ian, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm very encouraged by the recommendations of what's coming out of this work group and what we've gone over today. However, I'm still concerned about the problem we have with some short-term rental owners, their arrogance on the way that they say, well, I've had all these calls for service, but no violations, so I don't have a party house. We have situations I've heard where, and we've got one in our community, neighbors right next to a short-term rental party house are so fed up with the inaction that they put their house up for sale. And that's they love our neighborhood. Kids go to the school, and that's the last thing we want. So I'm hoping that with all the recommendations, the thing we do, that we get some momentum to try and just to tamp down these guys and say, no, you do have a party house and you've got a problem, and we need you to realize that before we can fix it.
Thank you, Ian. I've heard those comments as well. Thank you. Carl, go ahead.
Thank you. This is probably more for Brad than anyone. And this number, the number 9 here is, I don't know, for the working group point of view, if it's even material, because this is talking about what we do with the state. And the working groups, we're specifically trying to change what can we do with what's in front of us, right? But the question for Brad would be, and this is what, with this discussion with Luis, I guess council can't change, and we're not going to go, let's say they choose not to file a lawsuit with the state, okay? But what's to stop, and Brad, maybe you can help me with this. It is complicated at the state level. So how can council come up with through the League of Cities, create a platform with which it helps its stakeholders lean into? Some of the challenges, we get real upset. Oh, let's get rid of them, or let's do this. Well, you go to the extreme and you end up losing. There has to be a solution next year with the state, with the cities, something where we can all learn to live together. And Brad, what's happening in that regard?
Yeah. Hi, Carl. This is Brad. And good question. I've been living this every year at the legislature since 1350 was put into place, and I share everybody's frustration. We sit around, other lobbyists like myself, city lobbyists, and discuss, how do we get this fixed? How do we make this better? And every year we tend to come up with kind of a different approach, knowing that what worked or what we tried the year before didn't work. And we thought we had a really good chance this year of getting something, but I think looking back now, it looks like maybe we were too aggressive. Our thought was we want it all or we want nothing at all. And, going into next year, I think, especially with what this group is doing, I think we might have some ideas on how or what may be needed and how to fix some of this stuff. hate to say it, but I don't see 1350, the originating law, going away anytime in the near future. So I think we need to be just creative and figure out, at least in the short term, how we can kind of get along better and eliminate a lot of these nuisances. But I just don't see them going away in the near future. Hope that answered your question.
Spoken like a perfect lobbyist. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you, Carl. David, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Finally gotten back where I get in my computer and actually read what's going on. I appreciate and agree with almost all the comments that have been made. I certainly appreciate the great work the staff has done on this and the direction we're taking. I think focusing on the party houses or the problem parties certainly has merit, but I just wonder how we can address this issue where certain houses get repeated calls over and over and over again, and miraculously they tend to avoid getting any kind of citation or warning because the problem kind of goes away. And what we're left with is, how do we deal with the neighborhood creep factor, where people are complaining about these strangers running through their neighborhoods, driving around too fast in their neighborhoods, walking up and down the streets of their neighborhoods, scaring their kids in their neighborhoods, these kinds of things that don't quite rise to the level of party house, but are certainly something that citizens are very concerned about. If we look at the public comment, I think you'll see that theme running through there. It's more than the party house. And I think we've got a good direction here, but I think taking this point number 9, working through the legislature to see if we can address the idea of it's not just party houses, it's the creep issue. It's the fact that, yeah, somebody can turn an entire neighborhood into an STR zone and it becomes an unregistered hotel, and all the neighborhoods have been driven out because of the creep factor. And I think we need to kind of highlight that in our lobbying efforts and going forth, and looking at ways that maybe we can craft something in our proposed legislation, our proposed ordinances that would tend to address the creep factor, that if a house has had multiple calls, all of which have not turned into anything because of that, it's almost as though something more should be done. If you've had 5 or 6 calls and you dodged a bullet because, hey, there wasn't any noise here, it's crazy. I had an incident in our neighborhood where the report of a gunshot. We called the Scottsdale police, who by the time they came back there, the people explained it away. Now it was nothing there. I called the owner, who I know. Her comment to me was, it couldn't have been my people. They have great credit. In the meantime, she had been having, using it as house construction workers, and people were driving up and down the street, and big burly people are going out talking to 5-year-old girls, and not there's anything wrong with that unless it's your 5-year-old girl, but it was a creep factor. And we could never get anything done because they tended to just avoid getting cited. So I think whatever we can do to address that would certainly help out. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I do think that one of the recommendations that we have in 5G, that is reviewing all of the complaints to determine if there's a kind of a data-informed reason for any additional regulations in those categories that the state has allowed cities to register. I think that's an important step in the process. So doing that review of the complaints and seeing if there are any common themes that could be addressed further, I think might get to some of that. Councilmember Mailhaven, go ahead.
Thank you, Brad. And I just want to thank everybody for all the time and all the thoughtfulness that you've put into this conversation. And I share a lot of the frustrations that all of you do. And yes, we are nibbling around the edges, but that was sort of the point, I think, because we'd sort of said, well, there isn't anything we can do. And we said, no, let's challenge ourselves. What can we do even within the current constraints? So I'm really pleased with a lot of these recommendations. I think it'll have a big impact. In terms of another benefit I think we've gotten from this task force is, I know the police have a much greater sense of urgency. Putting a dedicated task force together, I think, will help ensure that the stories we hear about police perhaps not being as responsive as we would have liked them to have been are a thing of the past. I know there's an increased sense of urgency. I think Luis told me there's been more notices of violation since this task group got started than in the whole time we've had short-term rentals or something like that. But that the notice of violations are increasing, and so we know there's a greater sense of urgency. So I expect that will be better going forward. And then when you talk about the creep factor, I'm also thinking about the point that Brad made about not Brad, I'm sorry, Brent, about, you know, somebody could buy every house on the block. That's where we need to work with citizens to lobby our legislature to say, you need to allow us to put some reasonable distance constraints on this, so you can't have every house on a block or most of the houses on a block to be short-term rentals. So I think all of those things, I think, will help to make things better. But I certainly think this is a step in the right direction. And I'm hoping that the horror stories we've heard in the past will be significantly reduced when we put all of this in effect. So thank you all for your hard work.
Thank you very much. So let me I'm going to put up the agenda really quick. We are obviously continuing to improve these on your behalf. If there are things that you notice, please get them to me as soon as possible so that we can include them in. We will work to get you more advance notice before, let's see. Shane, can you see my screen now?
I can. It would be helpful to zoom in a little bit, I think.
I will do that. Okay. So it would be helpful to get that information. We'll get it out further in advance of your next meeting. I apologize for the one-day turnaround on this. We were trying to incorporate everything that we could and get in this final form as possible. As I did mention, it will be, your next meeting will be the 30th. We will be having this on the council agenda the following night. You can speak at that meeting if you'd like. If you can provide written comment at that meeting if you'd like as well, anybody can. And so what we'll do is we'll work at the next meeting to finalize the recommendations and then get council feedback the next night to keep moving forward on as many of these things as council may direct. I'm going to check one last time for hand raise, not seeing that. Then we will hear from you in the interim, but the next meeting will be the Wednesday, June 30th at 3:30 p.m. Thank you very much. And I am going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting then. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brent. Good job.